Hi, everyone. Welcome back to this week to the Usability podcast. Hope everyone is staying safe and healthy, and we hope this episode adds to the adventure of your at-home social distancing day. As we talked about the pros and cons of personas last week, this episode will dive into ways personas can be applied to user design, such as in cognitive walkthroughs, heuristic evaluations, and expert reviews. The resources and concepts we touch base on this week really fascinated my understanding of usability testing in concrete terms. Understanding the methods and standards interfaces are reviewed against paints a greater picture of this discipline. Touching back to personas last week, we talked about their use in communication, but not being used in creation of the interfaces. I found cognitive walkthroughs as a use case where personas are used directly with the interface. As a new learner to the term cognitive walkthrough, the usability body of knowledge provides a clear understanding of the method, including its positives and negatives. A walkthrough cognitively provides a sample for a user experience, where an expert performs the actions in an interface and provides feedback for each step. Furthermore, David Travis, in the 4 questions to ask in a cognitive walkthrough, explains it by stating, "The cognitive walkthrough is a formalized way of imagining people's thoughts and actions when they use an interface for the first time." Walkthroughs identify problems that new users will have when they first use an interface. This encompassing description from Travis provides a backbone understanding of the method. The methodology of cognitive walkthroughs break down the action into singular steps the user will take. The specific task broken down in the interface gives evaluators snippets of the process to analyze. Furthermore, I think Travis's explanation of a happy path for the process outlines the best case scenario for the actual user. If the user, in theory, completes each of these steps, the action using the interface will succeed. This cognitive walkthrough is useful when access to the actual user is distant. This is when personas come to play as well, as the expert takes on the role of the persona's characteristics, giving the user a face and qualities. Depending on if the person's characteristics are as accurate as reality, something last week we learned is difficult to measure, the findings of the walkthrough will show accurate strengths and weaknesses of the design. I also think the conversation on controls and actions articulates a realistic problem. Control and actions can be as easy as an on and off button labeled and the action to turn something off and on. Reading about this link shows how reactions and design can truly impact the user's experience. Moreover, this leads into the 4 questions one should ask while doing a cognitive walkthrough, including, will the customer realistically be trying to do this action? Is the control for this action visible? Is there a strong link between the control and the action? And finally, is feedback appropriate? Each of these questions addresses poignant aspects of a cognitive walkthrough, including feedback and the constructs of the design itself. To answer each of these questions, the expert needs to use their background research on the audience. This practice inevitably links the wants and tendencies of the user to how they respond to the actual design of the product. In addition, the word heuristic is a strong touch point in this week's episode. The first time I heard this word was in an undergraduate technical writing course, and it's interested me ever since, especially in its use in this discipline. A heuristic, or an approach, offers a structured praxis to move through a process. In this case, heuristic evaluation is a method in analyzing an interface against standard usability principles. In contrast to cognitive walkthroughs, I picture this approach as a step back, looking at the interface as a whole instead of focusing on the act of completing the task. Instead of embodying personas to directly test, if you would, the interface's effectiveness, heuristic evaluations are an outside looking in review of the product. The Interaction Design Foundation has an interesting piece on the method, illustrating their role as more of a report on the design qualities. Unlike persona testing and cognitive walkthroughs, it seems it is an individual endeavor, with each reviewer looking at the interface in their own way. In addition, the article Heuristic Evaluation from the Interactive Design Foundation helped clear up my confusion on how heuristic standards are reviewed. The article states that it involves a small set of expert evaluators who examine the interface and assess its compliance with heuristics or recognized usability principles. The key phrase in this explanation for me was compliance with heuristics. This explains, in a black and white form, how heuristics are the aspects of which the reviewer is judging the interface off of. This article then references Jakob Nielsen's 10 heuristics for a user interface design. Of the 10 design heuristics Nielsen mentions, a few stand out to me. As a proponent of strong style guide measures for technical writing and operators manuals, I found these heuristics to link parallel with style attributes needed for comprehensible manuals. For example, one of Nielsen's heuristics is emphasizing consistency and standards. His quick explanation of users should not have to wonder whether different words, situations, or actions mean the same thing. Along with the video, I try to keep these consistencies aspects at the forefront of my own mind while writing help documentation. For example, in almost every one of our instruction manuals, there are steps referring to taking the battery in and out of the tool. Likewise, we use consistent language for these operations, no matter where the instruction is listed. Moreover, each of our manuals has a functional description, which shows our diagram of the tool, calling out any important areas on the tool itself. Many times, these called out areas are then referenced in instructions later on in the manual. It is always a priority for us to ensure the same names are used in both sections when referring to a part of the tool. This not only creates consistency, but aids in usability for the user. In addition, bringing the conversation back around to cognitive walkthroughs, I see this form of product testing at work in snippets during my own department's workflow. The central idea to cognitive walkthroughs is embodying the user's perspective while completing the task on the interface. Many times throughout my projects, my manager and I will read the instructions that I am writing. Specifically, we picture ourselves as the user, walking through each step with the manual and tool next to us, simulating what the user would have in their own environment. I'd like to think this is an abbreviated method for cognitive walkthroughs, one without a written documentation areas to fix and change and less rigid, but nonetheless a simplified version of the process. I enjoyed diving into this week's content, seeing the concrete ways interfaces can be reviewed. Moving forward into our usability project for the rest of the semester, I'm starting to see the distinct ways I will conduct interface reviews. I hope as listeners of this podcast, you feel like we're bringing you along on this usability journey as well. Catch the Usability Podcast next episode in a few weeks. Thanks everyone for tuning in.